Yeah, in walking meditation, the only thing that you're doing is instead of watching the body breathing, you're watching the body walking. And over time, because you're practicing being the witness, over time, what happens is you start to identify yourself as the witness instead of the thinker. That gives you, that practice over time gives you a different world. You know, the world people live in that's a product of thinking is a very different world than the world that people experience by witnessing, just by watching. You know, to train yourself to learn, to observe, and to witness what's going on, and to train yourself to see the difference between that and what the thoughts are saying about that, and what the emotions are reacting to about that, opens up a whole possibility, a whole different possibility for your life. That's what this is all about. You know,
So it could really be almost any repetitive, like when I do spin class, it could be that too.
you're watching the body riding the bike. Ultimately, the practice of meditation, if you do it consistently over time, ultimately it will naturally be a transition where you will be meditating all the time. You'll be watching whatever is happening. You'll be watching the thinking. You'll be watching the emotions. You'll be watching what's happening in the body, right? And not only will you be watching what's happening all the time, but as you're practicing doing that, your identity is changing from being a physical body. Your identity is changing from being the personality that you believed you were, right? Your identity is changing from that to be the awareness that is actually what you are. Because that which is watching the body breathing is awareness. That you first have to practice formal meditation consistently every single day. That's the entry, that's the portal, that's the entry into experiencing your true nature. An ability to pay attention consistently from the view of a witness. That has to be a foundation. Once that foundation's there, then you take it to all different kinds of experiences, right? And you can deprogram your brain that way. You can deprogram your mind that way. You know, one of the things that's interesting, because I was telling Jerry that I was in this class all day on trauma, and the DSM-3 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that's used by psychiatrists and psychologists to diagnose people. It's a manual, it's a book that you use to look up stuff. You know, you look up and see what all the symptoms are, and it tells you what the diagnosis is. That was started in the 1950s. Before that, there was none. And in the 1950s, it was just a little book like this, and now it's 600 pages. And in the 1950s, in that book, it said that the source of trauma was what happened. In other words, it said if you were in war, the war caused you to have trauma and caused you to have PTSD. If you were raped, the rape caused you to, whatever caused the trauma was what happened. Now, in today's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it says that's not true. What causes trauma is not what happened. It's the way you think about it that's causing the trauma, right? It's your appraisal of what happened that's causing the trauma. And the reason they came up with that is because research showed that guys that came back from Vietnam, only 13% of them had PTSD. How could that be true if the war caused everybody to have trauma? Can't be true, right? So that opened up a whole can of worms in terms of understanding things on a deeper level. And now, because we have brain science, it's really added to that. Do you know that homosexuality in the 50s was considered a mental disorder? Yeah. So things change according to the society and the understanding and the brain science and all the rest of it. One of the things that's interesting, I often mention here, one of the things we all live with all day long is the mood we're in, isn't it? You know what I mean? That's such a common experience that we have, we don't necessarily even talk about it. We may not even recognize that it's a mood, right? But it's a pervasive mental and emotional state that's there. It's a pervasive emotional and mental state that's there, that's subtle, that's not necessarily that intense, but nonetheless there. Right? You have moods that you're in. Where do those moods come from? We have now studied the brain and studied these things well enough to know that the moods are a function of core beliefs. The moods are a function of core beliefs. If you believe life sucks and then you die, you find yourself in a negative mood state a lot. Of course you would. Life sucks and then you die, right? So if you examine your core beliefs and you change your core beliefs, it will change your mood. Again, this is why these practices and these teachings are so fundamental and so important, because you start to examine your life. You start to examine the thinking activity. You start to examine your emotional experiences. You start to examine the physiology. You learn about the nervous system. You learn about the sympathetic and nervous system, you know. And you start to understand that there are things you can practice and things you can learn and things you can relearn that will literally change your physiology and change your brain and literally change the perceptions you're having, can literally change your behavior, literally change your relationships, literally change how long you live, right? So the whole ball of wax, everything that's part of a human life, right, can be profoundly impacted by practicing meditation and by studying the teachings. And the teachings, by the way, the teachings are called the truth, capital T, truth. What's that mean? It means there is actually a way that things are. That's called the truth. It's, you know, things are actually a certain way. That's called the truth. One of the things that's actually a certain way that is the fundamental reason for human suffering, right, is a misunderstanding of who you are, the identity factor. The brain, we know now that the brain is a survival operation, right? The brain, that's why, because we still, that's one of the things that this guy was saying today. Our brain is still fundamentally behaving the same way it did when we were living in the jungle. It's still behaving fundamentally the same way. It's a survival operation. To get through each day, to stay alive, is the function of the brain. And it's the reason why we're in charge of the world, even though we're destroying it. It's the reason why we're in charge of the world, because of the fact that the brain and our ability to think forward in the future and backward in the past have made us very powerful over other creatures and other forms of life that could easily kill us. Okay? At the same time, that same brain that has allowed us to be technologically so advanced has continued to have us remain in a state that causes human suffering. Why? Why? And this is what the ancient teachings discovered. Because the practice of surviving in the world is no longer just a function of surviving as a physical body. When we were living in the jungle, it was a function of surviving as a physical body. If the body's not here, I'm not here. But as things changed over time, and we weren't in the jungle, and our physical existence wasn't under constant threat all day long, right? That was no longer a factor. And what replaced surviving as a physical body was surviving as a personality. And the brain doesn't know the difference. The brain doesn't know the difference between whether you survive as a person or a physical body. It's the same thing to the brain. Therefore, if you start to examine what causes threats to the personality, what has you feel threatened as a personality, right? Being made wrong, looking bad, right? As a personality, you will kill somebody that behaves that way toward you, because your brain considers that a threat to your life, a threat to your life as a personality. The problem with that is the personality is not what you really are. In fact, the personality doesn't actually exist. The personality is a combination. The personality manifests itself in the thought process, right? If I ask you who you are, you tell me what you think. You have no choice. Where are you going to look for an answer? You tell me what you think. And when you tell me what you think, you will describe your personality. Right? Therefore, your identity is your personality, and the brain has it that if that's threatened, you're threatened. Therefore, if that's threatened, you behave the same way as if somebody is threatening your physical life. Then you have neurosis. What's neurosis? A mild mental disorder, right, that almost everybody suffers from, right? And neuroticism means that you're misunderstanding reality and you misunderstand who you are, so you're in a constant state of anxiety. You're in a constant state of concern. This is such a consistent reality that for most human beings it goes unnoticed. Anything that's a constant isn't seen anymore, right? Breathing is a constant. You don't notice it unless you intentionally pay attention to it, right? The same thing is true with your mental state. You don't know how crazy you are because you weren't paying attention to it. When you start paying attention to it through meditation and you start to look, you start to take the witness position and start to look at your thinking activity, and then you look at what's actually happening in the world, you start thinking, wait a minute, you start realizing, wait a minute, what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling is not a match for what's happening. It's a gross overreaction for what's happening. So the studying of the brain and the studying of how personality gets developed and the studying of how this whole thing creates a very stressful experience, a very stressful life, to be something that you're not and to be something that doesn't even exist.
But you don't want to destroy your personality, you just want to see it for what it is.
You can't destroy it. It's impossible to destroy it, you know. You've got to go through a conditioning that will allow you to participate in life, which means you have to learn your name, you have to have a personality, you have to have a story, all that, right? That's not a problem, right? But when you think that's what you are, that's a problem. It's not what you are. That's no different than somebody who, you know, Rupert Spira uses this metaphor all the time about the guy who's the actor playing King Lear, right? And he uses this to describe the confusion that we suffer from, because the actor playing King Lear played the role so many times that one day he walked off the stage and he thought he was King Lear now instead of his actual personality. Right? And so now he's suffering the life of King Lear, even though he's not King Lear, right? So when he rediscovers his true nature, you know, he realizes that he was always his true nature. He was never King Lear. But that's no different than the rest of us in terms of our personality, because our personality is an act, just like the actor's acting an act. We're playing a role, we're doing an act, right? And that act that we're playing and the role that we're playing is based on our conditioning. As you believe the things you think are true about you as a person, right? And that becomes something that is determining the quality of your life all the time. You know, you are always afraid of the person being threatened. You know, this causes mental illness. This causes depression and hopelessness. This causes anxiety and fear. And it causes PTSD. It causes trauma. The reason it causes trauma is because it generates the kind of thinking that stimulates the kind of feelings that freak you out. That's how it causes trauma. It generates the kind of thinking and stimulates the kind of emotions that freak you out, right? That overwhelm the brain, so the brain can't process it, right? And so because it can't process it, it lives in the brain, it lives in the nervous system. And anything that happens that's similar enough to the original trauma brings the trauma back up. You know, so you keep freaking out over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. The treatments for trauma are changing in a good way. One of the things that I noticed today in this class on trauma is that mindfulness-based meditations, mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based practices are considered evidence-based practices that can be charged and paid for by insurance. The thing is this, mindfulness-based stress reduction is good. It teaches people to reduce stress, right? But it doesn't teach people about all the mistakes they've made in their understanding about reality and who they are. That's a major absence of a big piece of what this is all about. The reason John Kabat-Zinn didn't do that is because he knew that would be something that the hospitals that he was trying to get this into wouldn't accept. That's too much. They think that's religion, okay? But it's not religion. One of the things that we're finding out is that anything that you're afraid of, anything that you feel threatened by, if you talk about it, if you look at it, if you think about it, if you become more familiar with it, if you understand it more, if you don't avoid it, right, it loses its ability to stress you out. That's one of the reasons why in these teachings and practices that come from the East, right, what do they emphasize? What do I talk about here all the time? What do they emphasize? What's the subject that they focus on a lot? Come on, come on. I talk about it almost every class.
Focus on the breath.
No.
What did you say?
What are you most afraid of? Death. That's why they focus on death in the teachings and practices. Why? Because they want to decondition you about your fear of death, because death is a natural aspect of living a human life. And if you decondition that, if you talk about it, if you come to an understanding about it that it doesn't freak you out, if you come to an understanding about it that allows you to relax, right? Not only will that make a big difference when the time comes, right? But it'll change your life right now. Because if you're denying death, if you're avoiding death, if you don't think about it, if you keep it out of your mind because it's too much and it freaks you out, then your life is only about survival. Do you see that relationship? You're so freaked out about death, you can't even think about it, right? So every day when you get up, your life is only about survival. Survival as a physical body, and as I said before, survival as a personality, right? Which is unnecessary. So you spend a lot of time protecting yourself and defending yourself about a situation that doesn't exist. So that's why this is so critical. It's so important. It's one of the reasons that I'm here. It's one of the reasons why in my private practice, if the person is available and receptive and is willing, I teach meditation as a critical aspect of the psychotherapeutic process. And as I say here, if you practice meditation every single day, and if you make it your business to learn these teachings, which are dramatically different than the understandings that most people have, right? If you do that, it will have a significant and profound effect on your life. You know, you will be happier, you will be more peaceful, you will be more satisfied, you'll be able to relax more, you'll have less stress-related illnesses, you'll probably live longer, you'll get along with other people better. What can offer you all that? You know, and yet while that's the case, because human beings are still plugged in, you know, to the passing on of mistaken information, because most of humanity is still plugged into that passing on of misinformation, the world still is the way it is. People are still crazy. And they just keep past. And now with social media, the insanity gets past high speed all over the place, all day long, craziness all day long. And what doesn't get seen is that that's below the consciousness. What doesn't get seen is that as that process continues, it's feeding you information as a personality that's scaring you and threatening you as a personality, and you're not a personality. So that's one of the things that has to be different. You have a personality, right? But if you think you are the personality, then you behave to protect it and defend it. That's what the 8 verses of training the mind is about, Bob. You know, you should, and by the way, I looked that up on YouTube. There's a lot of teachers out there that are teaching the 8 verses of training the mind. You should check that out.
Oh, I have. Yeah, I have.
And the thing that's interesting about that is it's training the mind. It's not telling you as a personality to practice being a better personality. That's the way it would be misunderstood. No, it's training your mind that you're not a personality. How do you train your mind you're not a personality? Stop acting like one. Stop protecting yourself like one. Stop defending your personality. It doesn't need defense. Nobody can hurt it. It doesn't even exist.
I thought it was ironic they gave a rod and sent that out at the very end.
That's right. It was a good one last night, wasn't it?
It was interesting, yeah.
Yeah, my teacher, I practice up at Ithaca Zen Center, and that's where my teacher is. And he talks a lot about the 8 verses of training the mind because he understands that if you understand what the verses are pointing at, that's more important than the practice itself. The verses are pointing at the fact that your mind is untrained. That's why it's called training the mind. Your mind is untrained. Your mind is full of ideas that are no way related to the truth or no way related to reality. So if that's the case, you should make it your business to get that mess cleaned up as soon as possible and start acting as what you are. Start acting in your life as the awareness and the witness that you actually are, right? Which is already satisfied, which is already peaceful, you know, which can't be hurt by anything. It can't be, what you and I really are can't be hurt by anything, doesn't die, wasn't born. That's a pretty dramatic difference from the things that we believe and the things that we consider to be true. That's why the teachings are so essential. And the more you understand the teachings, the more relevant the practice becomes. The more you realize if these teachings are the truth, and if I am that far off from the truth and it's causing that much suffering, I need to practice every single day. I need to deal with my mind. I need to deal with my mind. Don't let my mind keep using me for its life. Don't let your emotions and your mind and your conditioning live your life. That's not going to be a pretty situation. That's not going to be a fun experience to have. And the possibility is there all the time for you to be free. The possibility is there all the time for you to experience the truth and be free, satisfied, and peaceful. But it takes practice because you got to the place you are by practicing stupid shit.